Primary maintenance practices required on the landing gear system are inspection, lubrication, and repair as needed. Because of the safety aspects of the gear system, inspections performed on the gear must be thorough and complete. Because of the mechanical nature of the gear, lubrication is critical in preventing gear problems. Lubrication of the gear is facilitated through grease fittings installed at critical points on the strut, drag brace, and other moving assemblies. It is important that each of these fittings be properly serviced at the intervals specified in the maintenance manual. Depending upon the operating environment, some operators may perform these actions at more frequent intervals. To properly service some parts of the gear requires partial retraction of the gear for proper access. Because the gear is largely mechanical, many problems can be spotted and corrected far in advance if the mechanic will always be on the lookout for advanced indicators. Chafing marks where you know there should be none. Dragging and stiffness in moving mechanisms. Components that appear loose or out of alignment. All of these things are telling signs of problems to come. Some components, such as rod ends and bearings, are difficult to properly inspect without disassembly. The amount of friction present in devices of this type can usually only be evaluated through hand operation. An important point in landing gear maintenance is hardware. Many rotating joints and components are used in the gear. Hardware used in these applications has been chosen to prevent binding in the rotating parts. Castellated nuts are often used instead of fiber or metal self-locking nuts to ensure that the fastener is safely secured without binding the pivoting or rotating components. Spacers are often installed to ensure that the fasteners cannot be over-tightened and cause binding. The installation of different type hardware will almost always lead to further gear problems. Note carefully the type of hardware installed when you remove it and reinstall the exact same type. The nose steering system requires that filters in the system be cleaned and replaced at regular intervals. The main filter for the steering system is installed in the upper corner of the nose wheel well. It must be removed and serviced in accordance with maintenance manual instructions. There are also two filters installed in the actuator itself. These filters must be removed and cleaned or replaced as per the maintenance manual instructions. During these replacements, the actuator and associated lines should be checked carefully for leakage. Check that the actuator is securely bolted to the strut and that no obvious damage exists to the potentiometers installed on top of the actuator. While you're in the area of the nose gear, it is a good idea to reach behind the strut and check the nose gear centering roller. It should turn freely, pivot easily back and forth, and most importantly, it should be there. If someone exceeds the toe turn limits, the roller is often broken off. If this has occurred, in addition to replacing the roller, the nose wheel steering system must be given a thorough functional check, as it can be damaged as well by exceeding the turn limits. The wheels, tires, and brakes require frequent inspection and replacement as needed. The tires wear from normal landing and takeoff operations and from tire skid-outs that may occur during landing. When tires are replaced, the wheels must be inspected as well. A key element of tire life is proper inflation. Tire pressure should be checked with a gauge, since the appearance of the tire will change depending upon aircraft loading. Wheels are subject to cracking and bearing problems. Each time the wheel is removed, the bearing should be inspected and repacked if necessary. Proper installation techniques must include properly seating the bearing between the axle and race before final adjustment of bearing drag is made. The brake pads wear as a function of landings and the amount the pilot uses them to stop the aircraft. Thus, the actual interval at which they will require replacement varies. They are inspected through provided access slots at each brake adjuster assembly. When the pads require replacement, the brake is usually removed and disassembled. During this disassembly, the brake must be inspected for leakage, cracks, and wear in accordance with the brake manufacturer's instructions. Because the nose wheel rarely suffers skid-outs and does not contain brakes, it is often overlooked during routine maintenance. It is of equal importance to the safety of the aircraft and should be checked as carefully as the mains. If chine tires are being used, the chines should be checked frequently for damage. A critical point to remember in wheel, tire, and brake maintenance is always use the proper type of replacement parts. There are a variety of wheel, tire, and brake combinations possible. Most of these different units have been approved for use because of operator request and due to operator preference for a particular brand or type. While it allows operators more latitude in choosing and purchasing replacement parts, it puts an additional responsibility on the mechanic's job. When changing a wheel, tire, or brake, you must inspect the remaining units carefully to determine replacement requirements. When changing to a different type of wheel and tire combination, or even when using a new vendor for tires, a retraction test to check wheel well clearance is required. The struts will occasionally require repacking and servicing. The design of the Merlin and Metro strut is rather sophisticated for this type of aircraft. A moving piston within the strut separates compressed nitrogen and hydraulic fluid. Because of this type of design, proper strut operation is dependent upon both the proper fluid level and the proper nitrogen pressure being present in the strut. Fluid leakage can occur both externally, through the O-rings that seal the strut barrel, and internally between the nitrogen and fluid sections. Either case will result in improper strut operation and must be corrected. Remember, the struts are serviced with MIL 5606 fluid, not 83282. Proper servicing of the strut is dependent upon a solid column of hydraulic fluid on one side of the movable piston and nitrogen on the other. All air must be totally bled from the fluid side of the strut. This is accomplished by lifting the strut to its full collapsed position and pushing the moving piston completely to the top of the strut with compressed air, and then pushing it back down with hydraulic fluid. This process must be repeated until all air is extracted from the fluid side of the strut. The proper nitrogen charge is then introduced into the strut through the servicing valve. Landing gear doors are another often overlooked component of the gear system. Main gear doors are subject to damage during tire failures. Both the main and nose gear doors can also provide advanced warning of gear problems. Physical deformation of the doors usually means that something has gone wrong in the retraction mechanism and requires immediate further inspection. Another area that needs attention is the emergency release mechanism. Since it is infrequently used, it is easily forgotten. The major concern is the length of cable routed through the aircraft, which is critical to the system's proper operation. The portion of the cable routed through the fuselage is usually safe, since little maintenance takes place in this area. But the two sections that are routed through the center section of the wing are frequently exposed to other maintenance activities. The cable is also vulnerable to maintenance activities in the pack area. The most important thing is that the cable not suffer physical damage during maintenance activities, and that its free movement not be restricted by tangling it around other components. Any pack maintenance that involves disconnecting this cable must be followed by an emergency gear extension test. Special attention should be paid to how much rotation of the emergency release is required to release the gear. With the gear extended, rotate the handle fore and aft a few times. Any binding is cause for further inspection. One final item of landing gear maintenance is washing the gear with solvent. While the gear should be kept clean, the type of solvent and frequency of use can affect landing gear reliability. Remember, proper lubrication is essential to proper gear operation, and solvents dissolve lubricants as well as dirt. Use care and restraint in cleaning the gear. Remember, unlike many systems on the aircraft, landing gear problems can usually be prevented by good mechanics performing good maintenance. Inspect the gear thoroughly, investigate any suspicious findings, and take appropriate corrective actions, and your problems with the gear system will be greatly reduced.